So we were talking earlier about some of the new changes that have gone into effect to help buyers qualify if they were out of work due to COVID.
Yep.
But before we get into the good stuff, let's just talk about where we're coming from prior to that. So let's go back a few weeks. If we had a buyer come in, say that they had been out of business or out of work due to COVID and they wanted to buy a house, what did that conversation look like?
It was tough. I mean, if we need that income, let's say you worked at a manufacturing plant and just happened to be shut down because of COVID, then even if you're on a salary, but you weren't receiving, or you weren't actually physically going into work, so you weren't receiving your full salary, then you're pretty much out of luck. A lot of those deals either get pushed a little bit till they do return back to work, or you have to qualify with some kind of, temporary disability, whatever they were on, however they weren't necessarily on a disability plan, but a lot of these were just kind of laid off or they were furloughed, for a certain period of time. So it was a challenge for sure. And we didn't run into a lot of them, but I know it impacted and slowed the progress for a lot of people that were out there trying to buy. And they just kind of had to wait till they get back to work. Plus, not knowing when they were going to go back to work too, it was a little nerve-wracking to go in and buy a house and go, I don't really know when I'm going to be back to work to make the payment on this thing. So, slowed a lot of progress for buyers, but big progress. Seems like a lot of people are kind of going back. You got a lot of businesses that are allowed to be open again. We may not see everybody get back to the same place. And maybe some of those positions kind of disappear just given the way that they have to operate, but it seems to be a lot better, right now.
Yeah, I had lunch with a client yesterday inside of Yard House. That was the first time I've been in a restaurant in months. It was pretty nice. It was refreshing for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so all of those servers and everybody, all the hosts, they're all going back to work, the chefs, so that'll be good. I mean, service industry makes up a large portion of our employment here, so that'll be good for us. So what has changed here recently as far as guidelines go for the buyers on being able to qualify?
So we've been given a lot more clarity around what we're looking for. So what does an underwriter have to do now to check it out? So if you can imagine that let's say somebody was out of work mid-March and they're back now. So now they're kind of getting a paycheck. Well, if you look at their year-to-date earnings, it's going to look like their hours have been cut, right? Because they were out of work for a month and a half, 2 months. And so they're not going to have the year-to-date earnings, which are always really important for us to look at. They're not going to line up with what their real earnings are. So if somebody was out of work for a while, they need to be back at work for about 30 days. Let's just make sure we have, consistent, so we can see those hours are kind of, starting to be more consistent. They're stacking up. That's good for somebody who's an hourly employee. And then they're gonna kind of take in account for that window of time in which they were out. So we'll document that with the employer and kind of state, hey, they were out of work from this date to this date. So we kind of back that out of the overall equation, and they won't really have an income penalty because of that timeout. So that's great news. If somebody was salary, let's say they were working at like Northrop, for example, and they're a salary employee, that income, as long as they're working, and most of those folks were working anyways at Northrop, but any other salary position, they're good to go right away. So because they're just salary, they're not going to have like these wild fluctuations versus like an hourly employee. Maybe what we're looking for is to make sure if they were full-time 40 hours a week, they're still full-time 40 hours a week. We're not giving them income that they don't really receive. Maybe their job has been adjusted to now they're just a 25 or a 30-hour a week employee. So that's kind of what the underwriting team is kind of looking for on that.
Okay, that's good. So I mean, that is logical and makes sense, right? And I'm just glad that logic is prevailing here finally. That's good. So kind of in the opposite extreme, when you were talking, I've got a few friends that have worked extra overtime now, right, due to everything that's going on. I know how the overtime stuff works, but can you explain that for everybody else and how that's calculated? And
kind of the opposite side of the spectrum. So somebody that maybe has picked up some additional hours just because they're now carrying more workload. It's averaged. So, if you're normally working 10 hours of overtime per pay period, and all of a sudden now you've got 30 hours of overtime per pay period, you don't just automatically get to use that 30 hours of overtime to qualify. So they're going to average that overtime over a period of time. Now, sometimes it's 12 months, sometimes it's 2 years, depends a little bit on the program and the structure of the loan. But in general, I mean, they'll factor in those extra hours that they are receiving, and they're going to just average it over a longer period of time and come up with, you know, what the consistency actually kind of looks like for them. So it certainly helps. There's really no negative to it in any way. It looks fine.
Yeah. And so they average it, do they average it for the year, or do they have to take last year's overtime and this year's overtime and average the two? What does that have to look like?
Yes, it just depends on the structure and the program. Sometimes it's a full year, so we may take year to date and then, you know, kind of go back and look at a full year average. Other times we're looking at a full 2 year. Most common is a 2 year average on overtime. So, you know, kind of seeing what they did last year, seeing what they've done year to date, and then kind of bleed into 2018 a little bit too.
Okay, good. For the people who maybe did, you know, get voluntold to take some time off during all of this, you know, besides getting back to work and having, you know, a few pay stubs under their belt, is there anything else that they can do, or if they're getting ready to get furloughed, or if they still are out of work, right? Is there anything that they can be doing right now, be it, you know, making funds available maybe from,
Right.
you know, any other accounts they have? You know, is there any other tricks that we can be doing right now?
Yeah, I think you made a good point about somebody that may be getting ready to be furloughed. Maybe their hours are about to be cut. You know, we're certainly not out of the woods. This stuff is going to kind of carry on for a while. And so a good best practice is to take this additional time that we have and really kind of look at what you have going on for expenses and see if there's anything that you can kind of short up a little bit and clean up. I mean, maybe there's some monthly subscriptions that you don't need to pay for, you know, that would really kind of help out, not having that extra $20 or $30 hitting your checking account every single month. Anything that you can consolidate, you know, would be great. Maybe, you know, if somebody's carrying student loans and they're making payments on them, you know, call and see if you can get some kind of relief on that for a few months, you know, just to help kind of keep a little extra cash in the bank. So, you know, a lot of that stuff, if somebody's worried about their position or maybe worried that that's going to change, that would be great. I think that's a smart move to go.
So with the student loans, and, you know, that sounds a whole lot like forbearance, even though it's more of a deferment, right? Will that have any kind of impact on their credit score or anything that they need to be worrying about on there?
It shouldn't. No, I mean, so student loans have two different things. They have a forbearance and they also have a deferment. The deferment is typically they're deferring the payments with no interest. The forbearance, they're deferring the payments, but they are still adding the interest to the debt. So, you know, if you owe 10 grand on your student loan and you're in forbearance for a year, whatever interest would be accrued on that would get added to that payoff balance in the long run. So most of the time the deferment comes while you're still in school. So if somebody's still attending school, then they're going to have this deferment on those student loans while they're still attending school. After they've stopped attending school, then the forbearance kind of kicks in and allows them to, you know, if they're not ready to make those payments, you know, come up with something there. And they also have like income-based repayment plans. So somebody maybe that acquired a great deal of student loan debt, maybe the new position that they got just doesn't pay enough to cover everything, given their household size, their income, et cetera. They can ask for some kind of an income-based repayment plan, and that will significantly reduce down what they actually have to pay. I saw one yesterday that minimum payment was 600, I think 688, somewhere right around there on their student loans. I don't remember the balance on it, but it was $688. And they ended up getting approved for income-based repayment, and that brought it down to about 123. And that's a huge difference for that family. So it made a big impact on what they had to spend every single month.
And as far as we know, that won't have an impact on their credit or anything. So
no, there's no impact. It does put a note on it. It'll say, you know, either deferred. It gives the date when it's going to come back into kick back into payment, or it may say forbearance, but it doesn't hurt the credit. There's no late. But what does hurt the credit is you got to pay it. So write it down on your phone, put it in your calendar, do something to remember when that payment kicks back in. If you were in deferment, we see. Not to get off on the student loan tangent, but we see a lot of these that the student loans are they're in deferment till, let's say, July of 2020.
Yeah.
And they've been in deferment for like a year or 2 years, and somebody's going to forget. And then all of a sudden now August, they've got a 30-day late, and September, they got a 60-day late. And then, October rolls around and it's a 90-day late, and they'd moved a couple times. So student loan companies like trying to get all these folks and they can't. And so all of a sudden now their credit just took a huge bath.
Yeah.
Because all these lates are showing up, and it's really just because those payments were kicking in. They just weren't being made. So you got to remember to kind of watch that. Probably healthy to monitor that account maybe every 6 months or so, just to see.
For sure. Okay, so good. I mean, so back to the, COVID layoffs, right? And so they get a couple pay stubs under their belt, they can come back and be able to qualify. And if they're getting ready to be furloughed, just shoring up all of their monthly debts is a great practice. And the student loan one, I mean, that's probably the biggest thing next to a mortgage that people should be paying attention to.
Yeah. Another thing on the COVID thing. So somebody who's self-employed, there's some announcements that are coming down the pipe. They're in play now for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So this is a good one for anybody who's self-employed. Here's kind of what self-employed looked like before COVID. We would get the last couple of years, either 1 or 2 year tax return, depending on the approval. And then we would get a year-to-date profit and loss. So for this year, we would get through from January through March or May. And we would say, what'd your income look like? And so the person on the other end just kind of throws it together out of QuickBooks or whatever accounting system that they have. They send it to us and they sign it. We look at it and go, all right, yeah, it looks like it's pretty consistent with what you were making, last year, the year before, and so on. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac said, we realize a lot of people that are self-employed have been impacted by this. And so we don't just want to take the honor system on the profit and loss. So here's what you got to do. You got 2 choices. You got one of them is going to be an audited P&L. So if you're working with a bookkeeper, then they're going to go ahead and audit your books and then send out something from a third party to say, hey, your P&L is accurate, not just, the self-employed business owner going, yeah, this is what I made right here. They're going to audit it, make sure that it's all real and legit. Okay. And if you don't do that, the other way to go is you can still, as a self-employed individual, you can still send your own in, you can sign it, make sure it looks okay. But with that, you'll need 2 months of business bank statements, and they're looking at income deposits, and they're trying to make sure that it all kind of lines up here. So that's kind of different from what we've seen in the past. In the past, it was just simply tax returns. In many cases, if the business has been open for more than 5 years, you got 1 year of taxes that you have to provide. We use the income off of that. We look at a P&L, make sure that the P&L kind of matches and it's not like significantly declining from the previous year. And that's how we approve that loan. Now it's an audited P&L or the 2 months bank statements with somebody who just kind of created their own P&L that way. So a little bit of a different approach. And again, it's just trying to make sure people are kind of on the up and up as they come out of this whole COVID mess. So
awesome.
It's probably the biggest change I think I've seen, from coming out of this COVID thing is, how do we treat somebody who's self-employed that way?
Yeah. And that tightened up quite a bit, versus, relaxing like we might have expected. So,
well, for a little while. So during the major part of COVID, I know we're not out of the woods yet, but during the major part of it, somebody was self-employed. Some banks were saying, look, you got to have 6 months worth of reserves in the bank for your expenses. Some banks were like, hey, you got to have 12 months. Some banks were saying, yeah, I don't want to help anybody who's self-employed right now until this thing's back on track. And then others were saying, look, we're going to take whatever income we see on the previous year, we're going to cut it by 25% automatically and just see where people kind of make sure that they qualify that way. So self-employed was hit pretty hard. We were still getting those loans done, but you had to be really well qualified to make it work.
Yeah.
Now they're relaxing a little bit on some of that. But you really can't fake the P&L. The P&L needs to support it. So if you were a restaurant owner, a bar owner, and your income maybe slashed a little bit this year because you're just doing takeout instead of having all the dining and dining stuff, that's going to make a big difference right there. So, think about all the different self-employed individuals that are out here. Some of them are still working just fine. Yeah. Others haven't worked at all. And then, there's been definitely some other ones that they're working, they're getting by, but they're not quite making what they did the year before. Those are going to be the ones that we And we have to really watch on the pre-approvals. As a realtor, you want to watch and make sure, hey, the offer you're getting accepted is going to look okay.
Yeah.
Kind of stand up to these new guidelines. These are guidelines across the board. So literally every bank is going to follow the same exact rule.
Yeah.
And then for a buyer, it's good if you're somebody self-employed, kind of get into a lender early so that way you can, calculate this out, make sure that everything checks out and it looks okay.
Yeah. Have you like very recently worked with any like hosts or waitresses, like people in the food industry like that? As you were talking about the bars and restaurants and stuff like that and their income being slashed, what came to mind was the servers and like how they automatically get taxed, a X amount of money for tips.
Yeah.
Have you seen anything like that recently? And have there been any changes around those jobs?
We have. Surprisingly, some do still receive tips because some of them are working kind of the front of that restaurant. I think a lot of people were pretty generous, realizing that that's a significant part of somebody's income. And so picking up food or taking out, they were getting some tips still. They weren't getting the same amount. And so that tip is declining. And if they're not receiving anything for a little while, that's where we start to lean back on, let's kind of give these guys 30 days back in the saddle and see how things kind of check out. That's the approach there. Or we don't have that to kind of rely on, then we may be forced to use just the base pay and get a feel for what that looks like. And to kind of answer another question that comes up quite often for servers is, I had a lot of folks that were coming to us as a server and they're like, look, I'm not doing as much serving anymore, obviously. So I'm driving for Grubhub. Can I use that income? It's like, no.
That's different industry, right? It's a different line of work.
Use the assets, so the money you receive off of that, you can throw it in the bank and certainly use that to qualify and use it for your down payment, but it's not a consistent income because it's brand new. We don't really know how that's all going to pencil out. So somebody who maybe is taking on just a little side hustle to kind of get them through, that's fantastic for your family. And it's good for you to throw the money in the bank, but it will not help you qualify if you don't have a history of actually doing that job. So
does that qualify now as a new employer for them? Because I mean, it's a different field, right? But is it a new employer or do they?
I suspect a lot of the people most of them that did that are just doing it temporarily until they kind of get back on their feet. I mean, maybe they find success there and they love it and they want to drive around all over town. Most of them are just kind of doing it for right now. And then if demand is such that they can kind of carry that and they like it, then they may carry it on. And if that's the case, to use that income with most loan programs, you're going to need a history there of at least 12 months, more likely 2 years. So working 2 different jobs. So let's say you worked at Yard House, now you work at Grubhub. And if you want to use both incomes or you need to use both incomes, you may need to kind of revisit this whole approval thing about a year, even 2 years down the road to make sure that we have some kind of consistent earnings for both. Because remember on Grubhub, that is going to show up as like a 1099 income. So it looks like you're self-employed on that. So if you received $5,000 for the year on Grubhub, your total after you write off your mileage and all these various things, you may only show that you made $500, because you probably don't want to pay a bunch of taxes on that. So we have to kind of see how that all pencils out. And that's one of the reasons why. Plus, we need to know if somebody is working 2 different jobs, are they keeping both? And there's guidelines. That's always been in the industry. We have people that work part-time. They work like summer jobs. And then in the winter, so they always have this consistent dual income kind of thing going on. And if they have consistency there, they've been doing it for a while, no problem using both. But where it gets a little bit like the lines are blurred is, in a weird situation like we've had in the past couple months, somebody picking up the side hustle, trying to help qualify, it just doesn't work from a qualifying standpoint, at least. Throws money in the bank.
Saves their skin for now. Probably the last thought I have as a question on this is, how is the temporary unemployment, the people that were able to collect unemployment during this time, how is that affecting everything? And how does an underwriter look at that?
It's kind of industry. So let's say you had somebody who's in construction and they're used to collecting some kind of unemployment every year. Every year they have their base income that they have with their company, and then that project or that job site's kind of closed up or finished, and then they may have like a gap before the next job starts or the union places them with another provider. So
Yeah.
it's often that we see unemployment several times throughout the year on those applicants, and we can actually use that as an income, especially if it's part of their normal and anticipated income for a job like that. Again, we just average it. So we're going to look at it over maybe a 2-year period and
Okay.
say, hey, what was the unemployment in 2018? What's the unemployment in 2019? Average that together and use that as effective income. We see that with studio workers. We see that with construction workers, various fields that may not have
The
365.
project-based.
Yeah, they're not doing consistent work all year round. They maybe have these gaps.
Interesting. Okay.
Unemployment in that regard is a little different than like somebody's on temporary disability. That would be something completely separate. So if you had somebody who's on like disability income for a little bit, maybe they just haven't been invited back to work because they're still, healing their back or whatever.
Yeah.
That income, we can actually use that right away. We just need to make sure they can go back to work.
Gotcha.
So, temporary disability income's okay. But the unemployment just needs to be averaged.
Got it. Yeah. And kind of the same from what I remember with the union guys and the guys at the studio, same thing. Like, hey, we can close, but I need you to get back and collect your first pay stub just to show that you've got a job again and
Sure.
take it forward. Okay.
Yeah. So that really hasn't changed. We're still looking at, it's not like, hey, my filming starting in August, can I qualify right now? The answer would be no, because you're not back to work yet. Same thing on a construction site, saying, hey, my project starts in July 1st. Well, that's great. We got to pause everything until you're back at work and we can show that you're actually earning and your hours are kind of back up and so on. So, those are the little setbacks still that kind of exist, coming out of, I don't really want to call it post-COVID, but it kind of is, because it seems like we're kind of on the tail end of a few things here. So I think the industry's kind of recognized like what to expect from all of this. And so because of that, they are adapting a little bit more, quickly and with more clarity on what they want.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Any other final thoughts to wrap this topic up?
No, I figured I'd point out something. So all week, my phone rings about rates. Everybody's asking, oh my gosh, rates are record low. What's this rate? What's that rate? And it's rate all day long. So I figured I'd touch on that just for a quick second, to give some clarity here. So regarding rates, yes, record lows. I mean, this is like an all-time. This is the best of the best. We haven't really seen much lower. People ask, should I float? Should I lock? What should I do?
Yeah.
Lock. Because this is as good as it gets. Could it get better? Sure. But it's got a lot more chance of going the other way and getting worse. And in fact, this week, today, yesterday, day before, gradual decline in the pricing for a given rate. So somebody who maybe came and saw me on Monday and got a 2.6% 15-year loan with no points, that loan today may have a point behind it because the market has kind of moved and it's still available as a rate, but the cost has changed a little bit. And if we look at the mortgage-backed securities, which a lot of times these rates are really they kind of tie to that. That's the indicator that we follow that watches, whether they're going up or down. Right now, there's a crossover on these support line and resistance line. So what we do is we look at like the most recent 200 days, most recent 100 days, most recent 50 days, most recent 25 days. Gives us an idea of the trend. So we can see all of that. Yesterday, the 50-day average meant that the rates were improving. That kind of line was going up. The 25-day average was going down. Now these are inverted when you look at rates. So when that line is going down, it's actually saying the cost is becoming higher. So you have a 50-day average saying one thing, and a 25-day made a big cross, said no, like they're not in agreement right now. When you have if something kind of happened like that, and by the way, the Fed's decided that there's enough stability in those markets that they're not going to continue to invest billions and billions of dollars into mortgage-backed securities as a buyer, that's part of what's actually causing those to kind of compress and then cross. When there's a cross like that, it's telling you that a change is coming. Could make the rates improve, could make them decline. And so what we're seeing right now is actually it's declining a little bit. They're still hyper low. So if we complain and go, oh my gosh, I got to close at 3.5% or 3.3 or something. It was 3.2 a week ago or 3.1 a week ago. It's still really, really good.
Yeah.
But it has made a little bit of an impact on what we're going to start seeing here. Now it could come back, but where it's at right now is probably what the experts think we're going to kind of live in this environment here for a little while. So if it's such that when you're looking at a loan on a purchase or a refi and you feel like, hey, this thing actually looks pretty good, our advice usually is to go ahead and lock that, unless we have a lot of confidence it's going to get a lot better.
Yeah.
But floating that market, it's a little dicey. You're kind of playing with some money. It may cost you. And what people don't realize is that when it does move, like today is a 30 basis point movement, 30 basis points on a $100,000 loan is $300.
Yeah.
Just overnight from last night till this morning. So start to carry that over into bigger loans, you can see what kind of an impact that has. It's pretty significant. So
yeah, and a little PTSD from when everything hit the fan a month or two ago, because we were talking before, like the average movement was like 30 points, right? But we had those days where it's like 300 points.
Yeah.
And now, that's $3,000 on a $100,000 loan. Those were some stressful days right there. That was not a fun time a few months ago.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we're not there. It definitely is a lot more stable right now, but the direction of everything, I mean, it's pretty stable, but it is showing signs. So the next support line, if we were to kind of get granular on where things are at, the movement that we saw today, about 30 basis points, meaning that yesterday or last night, whenever we went to price out a loan, today it's going to cost 30 points for that same exact rate.
Yeah.
The next line of support is 80 basis points lower. So could we fall and hit that? Maybe we might test that line and maybe kind of do a little bit of a bounce back. Yeah. So when we talk about rates too, I found like the best analogy ever, and I think it makes a ton of sense. So the analogy is this: rates kind of move up. The price for a rate moves up and down like a yo-yo. So you can imagine somebody just kind of using a yo-yo, bouncing up and down, and the overall direction of it moves like an escalator. So it's like a kid playing his yo-yo on an escalator. So we could see the pricing looking good in a trending line. So generally they're getting better, but every day they're kind of doing this along the way.
Yeah.
Which means rates get a little bit better, but some days are a little worse than others. And then you could see it go the other way, where generally the direction is saying, hey, these are going to get more expensive. Could be these good days, could be some bad days along the way. So they're going to yo-yo in the general direction, kind of like an escalator. So, it's important to kind of look at all that and just, that's what allows us to kind of see, is this a good time for somebody to lock? Is it a bad time for somebody to lock? Do we have a lot of support that says, hey, that if you hang in there for maybe 20 or 30 days, it's going to get better.
Yeah.
And we did that for a little while when, this COVID thing was a really big deal. We watched some stuff because we had a lot of the data that said, just hang in there, it's going to get a little bit better, and it did. So, but right now it's probably pretty safe to lock some of that stuff in there.
Awesome. Alrighty. I've got to get going. I've got another appointment I got to head to. Do you have any final thoughts that you need to include?
No, I think that's it. Treat people with respect. I think that's kind of been a hot topic for everybody in the world right now. And
be a good human.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it comes down to. Be a good human. Treat people with respect. Think before you speak.
Please.
Just really kind of look forward to. Actually, a few months ago, it was really kind of nice when everybody was like helping each other out, regardless of background or anything. It was just this really like neat, unified group. Yeah, we were all somewhat terrified. Yeah, about like what's coming or with this virus they can't see, and that's like all blown out of the water now. And it's like the ugly's kind of coming out of folks. So
unfortunately,
yeah. Hopefully, we can everybody.
All right, man. Well, thank you, and we will get back together next week. And anybody watching, if you guys have questions, let us know. We are here for you as a resource, and we will do our best to help you.
All right, guys.
Everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye.